Hello everybody. This is Ahmed. It is Wednesday, June 10. An article written by Professor David Schultz. Uh, He's a professor of political science at Hamlin University here, and he wrote an article in Counter Punch. The title of the article is "What is Wrong with the American Left?" The abandonment of class. Is really an article talking about how the left in America, kind of avoid talking about class and class struggle, and the issue is not really your relationship with work, with your production, your own the means of productions, or you own your, or you have is just your labor. You sell your labor, and it's always a taboo. It's a class class issue, class of classes, and they talk about identity politics and a democracy that's just stop at the factory gate. You have political democracy, but you do not have an economic democracy. And this is what this article is about. And I don't know about what is the left in America. I still don't know what the left is. The left in America is like a center in most of Europe. But it's an interesting article, and as usual, and it is really it brings a lot of issue, and I think it's talking not just here that communism and the Karl Marx critique of capitalism, it's coming back. People really now talking about it without being accused of being traitors or Soviet Union and all of that. And I think you hear a lot about how capitalism is failing, and how capitalism is really causes of all sort of problems, inequality, and accumulation of wealth with the few, and destruction of the environment, and alienations and of workers, and all of that. And I think David Schultz did a good job of bringing some of this argument that and show that why this really living all this our social life and political life to the marketplace, and to the oligarchy, and to the people who owns the wealth, and also it's not doing. And I think when the capitalist, and especially in America, did a good job of demonizing socialism, demonizing communism, and confusing the both. And when you find out the most of the problem that they related to socialism is really a capitalist problem, but the propaganda machine and corporate media did a good job of obscure main issues that are facing capitalism and facing in America. So we're going to have Professor David Schultz very shortly, and we're going to be talking about his article at the Counterpunch, and then we're going to address some of the issue he brought in this article, and so stay with us, and then we'll come back to you with Professor David Schultz, a professor of political science, Hamlin University, and he wrote an article at the Counter Punch, and I think the article says what's wrong with the left. And let's start, before we answer the question. Let's start with what is the left in America.
Extent, if we think about the history of sort of left politics in America, uh, it's never been, except for a small fringe, it's never been, let us say, the the Communist Party like it is in France, or let's say, the Socialist Party in Germany, for example,
Or Italy.
or Italy, for example, like that. I mean, it's for the most part, I would say the left in the United States, with the exception of maybe what the Communist Party USA, which was got a small group here, it's been more or less the advocacy for what more social welfare spending. It has been let us now maybe tax a little bit more, spend a little bit more, spend a little bit more on healthcare, spend a little bit more on housing or something like that. But if we think about what European style and left politics, and I would say for the rest of the world, it's a couple of different things. One, it's about the reality of what's called class struggle. At the end of the day, that there is control of the means of production, that is control of corporations by a certain strata of people. And what socialism is about, or what real left is about in other parts of the world, is democratic control, not just redistributing the goodies, but actually what? Controlling, making the decisions who gets the goodies. And that's fundamentally, I think, what's important here is that what passes for the left in the United States has been some variation of, well, again, tax a little bit more, spend a little bit more, give a bit more to people.
Be
Yeah,
nice.
yeah, be nice. It's what? It's capitalism with a human face or something like that.
Smile or something.
And taking the rough edges off the marketplace. But it's never been at that more fundamental level of saying, the people should have actual control, democratic control of corporations, of investment strategies. What we've really sort of done at best here in this country is to say, yeah, we'll sort of democratize the political process, but we've never talked about democratizing the economy. And at the end of the day, Microsoft, or whatever they call themselves, Meta, all the corporations still retain basic control over hiring, firing, investment decisions. Um, Now, at one time, the old left in the United States, which was tied in with unions, sort of raised class issues, but still it was about what? Wages and time. 1960s happens, it shifts towards what's called the new left, which starts to look at identity politics. And what we have now is what I call the new left, which is somewhere between identity politics and symbolic politics. That let's make a bunch of symbolic statements about issues such about the economy or whatever, but it's not about fundamentally gaining control of the economy.
Well, I mean, this is great, but I think with your the title of your article, "What is wrong with the left in America?" You just describe the symptom, what they do. So why is this the case? What is wrong with the left?
What's wrong with the left is, again, and this is the first of a five-part series that'll appear over 5 weeks in Counterpunch. This week it was the shift away. It was the shift away from focusing on class in America, and focusing instead upon other issues that don't get at fundamental controls of power. I'm a political scientist by training also, and political scientists like to talk about not class, but talk about things like social economic status, and somehow think that, well, questions of status, education, questions about how much money you make, that's what politics is about. And what I'm trying to talk about here is fundamentally how class decides who has political power in America. And what the left has abandoned is that question about power. And instead, I've argued that it's gotten diverted away from talking about questions about power to questions about identity, to questions about other types of issues, but it's not fundamentally talking about who has power. And to me, at the end of the day, power is about, in part, what? goodies. It's about economics.
Who
It's
owns?
about me,
Oh,
me being able to say to you, I can withhold or give you economic resources, and you don't have a say in those resources. You have to hope that the kindest of strangers will give you something.
good luck with that. I mean,
That's right.
I mean, are we going back to Karl Marx or what? I mean, it seems like a lot of people, especially in Europe, now they're talking about Karl Marx and communism and what's wrong with capitalism. And they don't, I mean, it's becoming a fashion now. It's becoming popular. People are listening. People are really, because we have problem with capitalism, but people really haven't figured out what this problem all about. As you alluded to, people talking about, political freedom and we have democracy and all of that.
Right.
But as you mentioned in your article, democracy is stopped at the gate of corporation, at the gate
Right.
of the boardroom. So you also, what is so attractive now about Karl Marx's critique of capitalism that's been missing for since World War II and thereafter. So now it's becoming more attractive and
Sure.
acceptable, and it's not threatening and it's not dangerous for the intellectual and pundits.
Yeah. Well, two observations, actually three. First, I still think it's dangerous for some intellectual pundits because we still have an awful lot of red baiting going on in our society. And anytime you start to criticize capitalism, you're accused of being a communist. I mean, I find it humorous that, what is it? Minnesota's governor, Tim Walz, is described by conservatives as the Minnesota Mao. There is no connection between the politics of Mao and communist China and Waltz. Okay, so that's first. But second, an observation here is that I think the fundamental insight of Marx and then eventually the tradition that I'm looking at, a group of writers, including Edward Bernstein, Michael Harrington, Dorothy Day, is separating Marx's analysis from his political prescriptions. And if you think about what Marx was arguing here, it's about how, again, capitalism is about fundamentally a class conflict. It's about controls of the means of production. It's about taking what some people have said is the promise of democracy and extending it to the economy. I mean, the central insight, I think, of Marx is about exploitation. It's about how individuals are being exploited based upon their class status. And this is what I think the current left has missed at this point, is that really powerful insight. But why it's starting to come back now is actually kind of interesting because I think there's both a generational and to some extent, I'm going to say an ethnic aspect to this. And what I mean by that, if you look at people who are over, let's say, over the age of, let's say, 50 or 60 years old and who are white and Caucasian, capitalism has been relatively kind to them. They've got a house, they're doing well, they've got their pension, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're now a person of color, if you're, let us say, in your 30s, you're looking at how expensive education is, healthcare, the unaffordability of buying a house, of getting a car. Think about it. You're thinking about the fact that what? The American dream isn't working for me. That's what we're starting to see here is why is it not? What's really interesting is that there's survey research out here that says in the United States, for people under the age of 30, about 45% have a favorable view of capitalism, and about 45% have a favorable view of socialism. Partly because what? Capitalism is working for them. Now, what they think what socialism is, again, I think is just welfare state capitalism. But needless to say, there is significant discontent among lots of people that capitalism isn't working for people anymore. There's people, and you know this too. You know what Forbes is. You know Forbes magazine. Every year they come up with like a listing of the richest people in the world. The 30 richest Americans have wealth equivalent to the bottom 50% in our society. I mean, there's something fundamentally wrong where 30 people have the same wealth as what, 50% of the population. Not a surprise. If you've got 30 rich people, you're going to have what? That through that rich, you're going to have what? A bunch of poor people because what? They're making their money off of those other 50%.
And it's interesting. You want to be rich? I have no problem with being
I don't either. God bless
was a
America. Yeah,
exactly a billionaire or a trillionaire. But when you don't, when the money plays and affects the politics, now I have a
right.
problem. I mean, you can be rich and take your money. I mean, like in China. I mean, they created more millionaire than the capitalism did in the
Mhm.
last 20, 30 years. But they don't affect the politics. It's not a capitalist politics. It's still away from the party. Still, the political party establishment make those decisions. Like
Right,
some Chinese say, and he's defending, this Western reporter from BBC that, about, of course,
right.
talking about China and oppressive and all of that. And he said, in China there is one party. Party does not change, but the policy changes.
Yes.
In America, the party changed, but the policy does not change. It's still a capitalist. So we have two political party, but they still corporate capitalist party. So where do we go from here? And I think the Democrats rather to have a fascist run the Democrat Party or run the country instead of a socialist like Sanders or have you. So
Yeah.
where do we go from here? We are trapped with those two party system.
I think a part because, and you hit at it here, is that without endorsing, and I'm not endorsing the People's Republic of China for a whole bunch of reasons,
Yeah, oh yeah.
because it's an authoritarian regime. But what happens in the United States is that no problem if people want to be millionaires or billionaires. The fundamental problem is their ability to translate those economic resources over into political power. That's the fundamental problem. Is that it's how we let those economic resources affect the political process. And with that, I would argue, and this is going to be kind of a controversial statement here, because people are probably listening and saying, "Hey, Schultz, you're ignoring racism or sexism or discrimination against people of different ethnic nationalities." I'm not. But what I'm arguing is that what gives racism, homophobia, what gives misogyny or ethnic discrimination its bite is what? The ability to back up my attitudes with economic sanctions. That if I can now say to you, I don't like you because what, you're Egyptian or your skin color, that's
What's
bad
wrong
enough.
with Mexican cow?
Yeah, or whatever like that. That's bad enough. Uh, but if I merely just don't like you because of your skin color, but I can't do anything to harm you
I have no problem with
economically.
it. I have no
Yeah,
problem with that.
yeah. So to me, that's the issue. The other thing to be thinking about here um, is when, and again, going back to a point you made earlier here, is that there is a class war going on in the United States, except only one class is fighting. And there's a sense in which the Musks of the world, what is it, the Ellisons of the world, who are buying, major telecommunications companies and things like that. I mean, they are conscious of class. Uh, but they have convinced the rest of us that the enemy is not them. So instead, what will happen is that they'll talk to um, you know, co some person who's white, no college education, and convince them and say, "You're the problem. The problem is what? Those immigrants. It's those people of that religion, et cetera, et cetera." So we fight amongst ourselves and we don't take the bigger fight, which is what? The fight for economic power.
Well, let's finish. Let's end this with the trip that Trump made to China. He didn't take the most democratic stuff, thoughtful political pundits and thinker to China. He doesn't care what the how the Chinese politically runs. He took a bunch of businessmen, capitalists. So is
Yeah.
that all the America can offer now? Even
Trump's in an interesting situation at this point. That if you think about the classic tools of American power, economic, military, diplomatic, cultural, a range of tools like that, um, Trump has basically gotten rid of diplomatic, doesn't seem to understand cultural issues here, heart and mind, uh, certainly doesn't want to go to war with China, militarily. So he somehow thinks he can use economic tools, except what? China really doesn't need the United States right now. And so our leverage over China is very little. But he goes off to China and says, "Well, we'll bring a bunch of billionaires, and maybe we can do a bunch of trade and sell them a bunch of stuff, and therefore we can have control over them or something like that." Uh, kind of a naive approach. I read this great line.
it's bankrupt.
Yeah. I read this great line recently from somebody from the Cold War who said that uh, the ability to inflict pain is the ability to have a good bargaining position. And I kind of like that statement there, is that we really can't inflict pain upon China right now. And what do we really have to offer them that we can basically say we're going to use our capitalist system? What? I'll quote Khrushchev. There's this great line in the early 1960s, Nikita Khrushchev, who was the party secretary for the Soviet Union, who what says at one point about the United States, "We will bury you." Didn't happen. I'm not sure Trump can bury China. We just don't. He somehow thinks that capitalism is going to prevail. But as you pointed out, probably the best capitalist country in the world in the last, what, 30 years has been state capitalism in China.
Well, how about comparing Trump's visit a couple of weeks ago to China to Nixon in the 70s? I mean, Nixon was has leverage then
Yes.
than Trump.
Yeah, what Nixon had at that point was basically offering China um, access into the rest of the world. Remember, at that point, China wasn't diplomatically recognized. It was cut off from the world. It was an incredibly poor country. He offered to them with the hope that he could basically buy them off into the world system. Now, we could have a great debate for another show regarding whether or not, over what, almost over a 50-year period, whether or not things like the World Trade Organization, whether or not global capitalism has bought China off or not. But Nixon certainly was in a very different bargaining situation, as was the United States. Because even in the 1970s, the U.S. economy was probably about 30 to 35% of the global economy. China, maybe at best 5% of it. Now, China and the US, depending on what data you look at, are both what? On parity in terms of the size. We just don't have the leverage. Trump does not have that leverage. China has something especially that we really want. Access to all these what rare earth metals. And think about it. When Trump declared the trade war last year, what was it, Independence Day last year, and imposed all these tariffs on China, he backed off really fast when China said, "Well, sure, you can impose these tariffs, but we're going to embargo all these metals that you need to be able to make transistor chips and so forth like that." Uh, so much for Trump's bargaining power.
Well, and this was, we're talking about the failure of capitalism and failure of the left in America. I mean, China in the last 20 years achieved this miracle economically
Yes.
without invading any country, without bombing any country, like on any other capitalist system that like British, French, whatever. They had to go and invade and steal from Africa and
Right.
enslave millions of people. China didn't any of that. Isn't that worthy of some kind of at least looking at this experience and kind of learn from it? How did they do it?
Yeah, I think there's lots of lessons, both good and bad, to be learned from um, China's sort of ascendancy in the last few years. Again, maybe I'll use an ironic statement. When Mao was still party secretary, he tried at what was it, the 50s, the Great Leap Forward, which didn't work, an effort to try to modernize China. We can basically say what China's done in the last 30 years, 40 years, is the second great leap forward, and it actually has worked. But what this all tells us is something really interesting, that at least the American version of capitalism compared to China uh, certainly isn't working as well in terms of raising standard of living, um, producing help for those who are the least advantaged in our society. Yes, China still has massive, massive problems economically and politically. But going back to something we talked about before, the reason why I think there's a criticism for the left right now is that the left in America is failing to address the fundamental economic issues and issues of power that everyday people are facing.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Professor David Schultz. He wrote an article, a counterpunch. You can get it online. What is wrong with the American left and the abandonment of class? Thank you so much on this hot day, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
We're gonna end.